All right, well, I think we can get started. Again, I just want to say welcome. Thank you. Thank you for joining us, everyone. My name is Rachel Hauk, and I am the Executive Director for the Brass Tacks Initiative. So once again, I just want to say that, the cameras, microphones are disabled. Make sure you use the chat feature or the question and answer feature if you want to talk to me or my panelists. And this webinar is being recorded, and we will be posting this online so that we can reach a broader audience longer term. And it'll be great. So I'm excited to hear what our panelists have to say, or our speakers, I should say. Let's see, going through my notes here, trying to see what else I need. Okay, so with the question and answer feature, if our speakers happen to see a question in there that's relevant to a topic they're discussing, they may choose to answer it right away, or otherwise we'll just wait till the end and answer as many questions as possible. We did reserve time for that at the end. Like I said, I'm with the Brass Tacks Initiative. I'm Rachel Hauk. For those of you who are unfamiliar with our organization, we are a nonprofit founded on a mission to support sustainability in the food stream through research, education, and collaboration. And I just realized I'm going to stop sharing this and put up our other slideshow here. Just got a new one. Here we go. Sorry, guys. So Brass Tacks was founded on a mission to support sustainability in the food stream through research, education, and collaboration, right? So programs like this are essential to our mission because they help just spread that awareness and information and solutions to the food waste problem. So for more information about the Brass Tacks, you can visit our website, www.thebrasstacks.org. And with me today are speakers from Innovative Waste Recycling. And I just want to say on behalf of BTI how grateful I am that you're here. Innovative Waste Recycling is a huge supporter for BTI. So these guys are always there to answer questions, to help out with things when, if we need volunteers or if we need an introduction to a business or something like that, these guys are willing to make that introduction for us. And we have Todd Fisher, David Russick, and Kyle Sable. Todd is an accomplished expert with over 25 years experience in food processing, process improvement, and upcycling. He is a project director for Innovative Waste Recycling, and he provides unique solutions to improve sustainability goals for large-scale food producers. He has a background in managing quality, food safety, regulatory, supply chain, information systems, and much more, with certifications in lean methodology and statistical process controlling. Todd's experience and leadership make him an ideal partner for any company looking to improve its sustainability efforts. David Russick, as Chief Strategy Officer for Innovative Waste Recycling and Project Manager. David is a visionary executive leader known for transforming markets through environmentally progressive businesses. With a background in founding and leading successful waste and recycling businesses, David brings a wealth of experience to his role. His dedication to fostering innovation and entrepreneurship in sustainable business practice underscores his passion for environmental stewardship and sustainable community initiatives. Kyle Sable is a business professional with a passion for finding solutions to sustainability challenges. Kyle has gained experience in agriculture, food processing, quality assurance, supply chain management, and much more. And he is currently serving as a project manager for Innovative Waste Recycling. Kyle specializes in managing byproducts and optimizing supply chains to contribute to a more sustainable future. His expertise in planning and organizing and directing quality programs aligns with his commitment to driving environmental responsibility within the recycling energy industry. Sorry. And just once again, thank you so much for joining us today, gentlemen. And with that, I am going to turn it over to you.
Great. Yes, thank you, Rachel. I'll start off here. Again, I'm Kyle Sable with Innovative Waste Recycling Project Director. And to start it off here, I'm just going to kind of go over a brief summary of kind of what a path to sustainability, may look like for food producers from a general overview. The typical path for a food producer to sustainability is never a straightforward one. There's always a lot of moving parts, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. All of a sudden you're presented with a challenge that you might not have foreseen, things like that. So, typically it's a holistic approach encompassing environmental, social, economic aspects. But the biggest one here for food producers, I think, is operationally. And understanding how sustainability can affect your operation holistically. This requires continuous improvement, stakeholder engagement, and commitment to a responsible practices across all sectors of the food supply chain. And you can never really eat a whole elephant at one time. So that's kind of the approach we take here with sustainability and food producers as well. So it's, tackle that low hanging fruit, identify that easy stuff to start with, and then, baby steps. And before you know it, you're going to be at 100% sustainable, or, whatever your metrics or targets are. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Todd to talk a little bit more about waste and waste areas and where waste is generated in the food waste stream.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. Yeah, I'm excited about talking about that. So before I do, I'm going to ask you a question before we get to the next one.
Yeah.
So when you look at with the food producers that we work with, what are some, what do you think some of the primary drivers are? You hinted at kind of operations. What are some of the maybe internal drivers and kind of external forces that would cause a food manufacturer to consider, hey, maybe we should look at doing something other than the landfill? Like, what do you think, just with your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the big 3 for me would be, the environmental aspect, the operational aspect, and the social aspect. Not the social aspect, the economical aspect there. So with, landfill prices continuing to increase, I just think there's other viable, environmentally beneficial and sustainable options out there where some of these byproducts can go and, produce a positive effect on the environment.
Yeah, I agree. And we kind of see some of the differences even regionally, right? I know my colleague Dave here is in California. And when you look at those economic factors, that's a little different than somebody that might be looking at disposal in a state like Idaho or somewhere like that, where disposal for materials really low, right? But there might be a KPI or a platform as part of that company's mission to say, hey, we're gonna try to keep stuff out of the landfill as much as possible. So there's a lot of factors, right? In the region fits in, available technologies, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So cool, good. Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, thanks. Also, I think we're depending on the state, we're seeing a lot of regulatory issues that are requiring sustainable practices, particularly keeping material out of the landfill. Depending on the state, again, landfills have been closed, particularly for anything other than construction and demolition waste. So the options are fewer. And as Kyle said, the costs are higher. So now there are economical opportunities to be sustainable, and you can save money doing it.
Yeah. I think you're spot on. And I think we've got some points later on about those pressures, especially around regulatory, but there's a lot there. There. And I've been asked a lot recently, well, how's the current administration, how might that affect the view on kind of economic or environmental requirements? And so that's something, if we have time at the end, let's get into that. So my section, I want to talk a little bit about waste. We're going to kind of keep this higher level. If there's something you'd like to know more about or a deep dive, just ask a question, shoot a comment, and then we can kind of go down that road. But when we think about food manufacturing, I think of really 3 areas where waste is generated. And when we talk about organic waste, I have a food background. And so those on the call with a food background or that are in food or quality, when I say organic, you're thinking maybe, certifications, audits, paperwork around kind of organically produced products so that can be labeled as organic. When we talk about organic on the waste and byproduct side, we're really talking about food materials, right? So whether it's certified or not, we kind of use that broad term of organic. So I think of incoming ingredients, how are those ingredients handled? Where are they stored? A lot of companies have just-in-time systems, and the day that it comes in, it's being used as part of a food process. But some companies don't, right? They're buying in bulk, they're maintaining inventory. They might even be saving an ingredient over a season or 2, ingredients that have long shelf lives. But there is a certain amount of loss and waste generated there, especially in case an ingredient expires. Let's say there's a food safety issue or a quality issue, a year down the road. Maybe there's an infestation. There's all kinds of reasons why we might get a call, or there might be concern around, hey, now I've got 30 super sacks of this certain type of product. What am I going to do with it? I can't use it in my plant anymore. Traditionally, the landfill is kind of an option, but what are some other things that we could do? So that incoming ingredients, there is some waste generated there. I would say kind of point or stage number 2 is where the majority is really caused, and that's just at production, right? Making products. So when we think about, my daughter loves to bake, and I love it when she bakes, right? Because I get the benefit from that. But there's always waste involved. When we make food at home, no matter what it is, there's always a certain amount of trimmings and excess that go in the trash can. And food production's no different, right? Other than it's on a massive scale and can be more efficient, right? But so whether it's waste dough, whether it's a seaming operation that's has a certain number of rejects, whether we're talking about product that pretzels that break as part of an enrobing process, during production, trimmings of meat plants, there's always a certain amount of waste that goes on. So we look at how is that being captured? Oftentimes when we first work with a potential client that says, hey, I see all of this, we're kind of throwing in a dumpster and we're mixing it with packaging and netting and it's just going to landfill. What are some options here? And there are options. And so it's really about, how do we gather that? How do we make it easy for operations at that point? Because we know if it doesn't work on the plant floor, operationally, it's not going to last, right? The sustainable practice won't continue. So at production, how do we make that easy to gather, easy to segregate so that it can be used for good? And then just finished goods. Once product is packaged in its retail or pre-retail, so maybe it's wrapped and cased, maybe it's in some sort of a cellophane, whatever that finished good form looks like, there can be waste there. Well, because we would think once it's in that stage, right, it needs to be shipped to maybe a distribution center, and then it waits there, and then it goes to retail, or maybe it's being shipped to a distribution center that's going out to food service. But there are things that happen, right? So reefer trucks lose temperature. Now I've got a truckload of chicken that I can't sell anymore. We have damage at a distribution center. Heaven forbid, I've got a hold or a segregation. There's a food safety issue. We had a metal detector go down for half of a shift. We've identified that product. What can we do with it? It's never good news. Nobody wants holds and segs, right? We wish we could completely do away with them, but it is somewhat the reality of the business. And food companies have incredible processes in place to get their identify through HACCP and then get their arms around through a hold and seg kind of inventory management system, get their arms around that inventory. And then, what I would say, I would encourage, rather than kind of that next step of let's just go to the landfill and document that, what are some things that can be done with that, right? Ideally, we want to talk here with Food Waste Prevention Week, lessening the amount of all 3 of these steps, right? What are some ways that, yes, doing good is important, but then just lessening the amount of waste that's created is very important. And I think, I know I'm kind of going on here, Dave, you've got the next point, but lastly, I think the more that sustainability. Kyle focused on it, kind of eating the elephant all at once. I think as a management team, as a shift lead, as a group, once people start thinking about sustainability and waste, I'm going to do good with what's being produced. The mindset kind of shifts also into, well, how do I just create less of it? It's kind of a natural extension of doing right by the waste that we create. So certainly do right with it, but then kind of look at how are we preventing, and I could talk about that for a whole nother talk here, but how are we really just preventing waste from occurring in the first place? So Dave, I know you want to talk about goals and targets, and that's kind of a good segue into kind of when all this is generated. How are we tracking it?
Yeah, thank you, Todd. I just wanted to add a couple of things on your point.
Yeah.
IWR, as an example, we are coast to coast, and occasionally we will, as Todd mentioned, there will be a refrigerator truck where the refrigeration unit fails, and then IWR in particular finds a recycling outlet for that truck that could be stranded in California or stranded in somewhere in Minnesota. And so we get calls from these trucking companies to say, what can we do? And we can turn this around pretty rapidly. So that's a good example of what you were talking about. So I'll go ahead and start. Setting goals and targets. I think the first thing, and we're also going to be talking about this later, is an assessment of what the plant is producing. You need to sort of set a baseline for you to be able to understand and measure the goals that you want to set and reach from there. So again, IWR does this, but you can also do this internally, is to really go from top to bottom and find out and measure the amount of waste that's occurring today, whether it goes to a landfill or not, and then use that as your base measurement as you start to set goals for improvements. Define your targets and set your timelines to track progress and measure the success. And this is a slow process, and probably be some trial and error here. But the point is to start that process and then to continually measure it as you proceed. I can sort of segue to Kyle and conducting a waste review or that assessment that I talked about.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Like Dave said, with setting, clear goals and targets, you got to have data or something, to start, or measure those goals. Where are we going to get to? Where are we starting? What reduction do we want in this food waste for, this discussion's points. With conducting a waste review, waste audit, waste walk, whatever, the company wants to call it. I think, starting off first is, identifying the key sources of the food waste and getting your hands kind of around those areas of the operation, such as, Todd alluded to in his previous points, the incoming ingredients, the production, the finished goods, warehousing or storage, that type of stuff. So kind of understanding, gathering all the informations, the quantities, the sources of those wastes, pinpoint the areas that you can reduce, where can we improve on recycling, and then where can we, overall optimize the waste management system at our facility to help with, complete this. When you conduct your waste review or audit, I think something big is to just remember the 5 R's of recycling. So just the refuse, reduce, reuse, repurpose, and recycle. So just kind of remembering what your different options are for those types of wastes too in your facility. So if it's a ingredient or if it's a byproduct from production, is this something that can be composted? Is this something that can be upcycled? Kind of categorizing those into certain areas, and then really just getting all that data to review as a team. And I think this is another great spot to or great time in the sustainability process for companies to engage their stakeholders or employees. getting them hands-on experience with sustainability and making them feel like they are, making a big change in the current processes and a difference in the environment locally and across the world. So I think with that, good transition to Dave here to talk about some education and training into, getting people involved in this process.
Kyle,
Yeah.
can I add something to that quickly?
Yeah, 100%.
If you don't mind, Dave. I think sometimes when we talk about data gathering, there's one, it can seem overwhelming. Like, where do I even start? And you sit down as a group, as a management team, and you start thinking, okay, what kind of data do we want to gather? And it's really easy, and I'm kind of built this way. I think it's really easy to come up with 50 categories, right? Okay, the more detail, the better. And I think, early on in the process, detail is good, but it's always good to try to make decisions around, okay, what kind of data can help us make some decisions, but we don't get lost in tracking and kind of all of the different variances of data. I would just encourage, I think consistency is more important early on. So kind of a consistent audit, a weekly audit, maybe at different times to capture different things that's going on. We know at night shift, things happen differently at day shift, that sort of thing. But just, pick, and we could talk a little bit more about this or maybe in the questions, but your 5 or 6 categories. Hey, here's a dumpster on the west side of the building. We're just going to write down maybe a quantity of are there any finished goods here, and do we have any production waste, right? And just kind of try to keep it easy, because then you can make decisions based on that. I just encourage people. It can be easy to kind of create a very complicated system, and again, I'm a prime offender here, right? A complicated system that then can be difficult to maintain. I would start easier and try to be consistent as data is gathered. So. Thanks, Kyle.
That's a good example.
Point.
Taking a look at the dumpster, you actually have a lot of that the information already, because you're paying somebody to move that material in some form or another. So you can go back and actually find out, talk to your accounting department, where was this actually going? What was the cost and what was the volume? Yeah. So a lot of that information is already there when you see those dumpsters on site now, and then you can check, where. When we do these assessments, sometimes it's a surprise as to where it's going. Working with one account, during an assessment, they were going to go back and check. They thought they were landfilling. Actually, they were recycling the material. They knew, going back to the old invoices from that vendor, knew exactly where it was going after he checked, but it wasn't top of mind. So there are means to go back and find out how it's being managed, where it's going, what the cost was. So it's within reach.
Yeah.
Then as far as education and training, this is important, particularly depending on where this material will be recycled. Contamination is a big issue, and you need to train the workers that are managing the waste in some form or another, filling up the container, or even on the production floor, not to throw, for example, their gloves into the organics. This can really be a problem for the end recycling outlet when they find contamination. So when you are training your people, contamination is one, and in certain cases also consistency of the material, segmenting the material into different containers is going to be important as well. And there is a lot of turnover too for the people that are kind of managing this stuff. So it's got to be somewhat continuous. And I've run across this again. We work in these plants. We do train the people that are managing the waste so they understand the importance of keeping it clean. You do that, and then someone new comes in. So it's not a one and done. It's got to be continuous. I think that's important. And then fostering a culture of sustainability within the organization, knowing, again, from top to bottom, that this is a company goal, a corporate goal, to meet sustainability goals and to have everybody on board. Anybody have anything else to add?
Kyle, Dave, you'd mentioned kind of the continuity. I mean, Kyle, wouldn't this be a great spot? As part of every food safety plan, there's a section of color-coded implements, containers. This would be a great spot for, hey, we're gonna have an orange bin for food scraps, right? And it's as part of that program, it would kind of continue to live on.
Yeah, 100%. And I think kind of based off, Dave's points too, and your previous points from, conducting waste audits, Todd, is it's very easy to make this overcomplicated. So keeping it, again, simple for your employees, well, the training, keeping that all simple, straightforward, your collection processes, making it easy for people to, throw their gloves in the same bin as the food when there's no waste basket in that area. Maybe putting a waste basket in that area is going to mitigate some of that risk. So, just kind of remembering to keep it simple when you're educating and training these stakeholders as well. So,
good addition there. So we've talked about how is waste generated. What are some things we can do to avoid it? How do we train people? Kind of how do we get our arms around it a little bit, track it? I just want to talk briefly about, well, now that we've got this waste, quote unquote waste. We use the term waste. We use the term byproducts. What do we do with it? Like, what are options? It's not as straightforward in most regions. Excuse me. It's not as straightforward as the landfill. The landfill it's been going on forever, right? There's a truck that comes and picks up. These options aren't as straightforward, but I'm going to kind of talk about them in order of what we would consider innovative waste recycling would kind of consider in importance. And oftentimes waste and byproducts, especially in the ingredient, so I talked about the 3 stages, in the ingredient stage or the production stage, most of that is not food safe, right? It's not something that you can enter into commerce. Once it's kind of needs to be disposed at that level, it hasn't been handled in a food safe manner. It hasn't been, thermally processed or those sorts of things. So it's not in a form that can be resold or given away. But finished goods, oftentimes, if goods are kind of nearing an end of life, there's quality issues that you or I may not notice, but that the retailer won't accept, right? So we always encourage food recovery. Make very good relationships, and we have relationships. If you have questions around this, we can point you in the right direction. Make very good relationships with either a local food bank or a regional or even some national level food banks that, most warehouses, and this is part of the challenge, when you have a truckload of a certain product that is maybe aging out in a month and you'd rather donate it, well, that's in a small town, they're not going to be able to take a truckload. They may not be able to take a pallet, right? And so then it becomes a management issue and the time and expense to kind of figure that out. But some of the larger food banks or distributors, they can take this type of material. And so I think I would encourage anyone, reuse into human food is the most sustainable practice that we can list, right? And I'm going to go through some other ones here, kind of trying to do good with this material, but donations, that sort of thing is absolutely what we encourage. So that's first. But from there, you go into things like, okay, so for ingredients or production waste, if it's not food safe to begin with, or finished goods that maybe have a food safety issue, what do we do with that stuff? Well, we've got sustainable technologies. You have things like anaerobic digestion that helps create power with that material. You have things like beneficial reuse land application. So for certain materials, how do we provide this to farmers so they can enrich their soil, avoid chemical use on their soil because this material contains the nutrients needed for the ground. So things like that. It does vary by region. It varies by material type, right? There's certain things you're not going to be able to put on the ground, but there's certain things that are very beneficial to land application, beneficial reuse. Same thing with anaerobic digestion. It's a liquid. It's a slurry or liquid process. So solids generally, unless there's a macerator of some kind, you're not going to send solids to an anaerobic digester. So you kind of got to work with the streams. Kind of Dave alluded to, are we going to kind of segment what we have for different technologies? And sometimes that's what's needed. But Really, any of those things are at a level above landfill. Our goal is, hey, let's not dump it in the hole. Let's just try to do something good with it. So again, what's food recovery look like in your region, and then what sustainable technologies are available. We help with all of that, but really, I think we can help point you in the right direction, especially around food recovery. We're a big proponent of that. One thing I'll talk about is just the challenges around organics recycling and packaging. So packaging exists to protect, it's a food safety issue. It's also a longevity issue, a shelf life issue. What type of packaging is there? So some packages, think about canned goods, think about cardboard wrapping, very recyclable, right? Some of the most, you can separate the organics. We'll run this material through something called a depackaging unit. It'll separate the organics from the packaging. That packaging can be recycled. It may need a little cleanup, but it can be recycled. There's some material we handle where it's a confectionery item wrapped in cellophane that's in a plastic clamshell that's in a cardboard box that kind of feeds into a plastic sleeve. And that's very common. That's really hard. We can certainly separate the organics out of that, but to then take that packaging breakdown. Oftentimes there are pieces there that aren't even recyclable, varieties of plastic. But then to kind of take that and then separate it again and again, usually it's not cost effective or labor effective. And oftentimes it's just not recyclable. Same with, a lot of our laminated pouches and that sort of thing. So there's been a lot of talk and movement towards recyclability of packaging products. So I don't want to imply that there hasn't been. There's been really good work, and I think there continues to be. But that's just something that we think about as a group. Okay, what does this packaging consist of? What does it look like? How easy is it to separate this material? So when we think about doing good with it, that's sometimes a roadblock. Packaging is a major concern, along with what's available in the region, and that sort of thing. So,
yeah,
Kyle, monitoring waste data.
Yeah, and just to kind of touch on that too, Todd, with the packaging challenges and things like that, I think that's only going to, for producers, become more of a high vis point with some of the regulations coming into effect here. ERP is a big one. So extended EPR, extended producer responsibility has been a pretty heavy topic, especially here in Minnesota. So just something else to kind of touch on when it comes to the challenge around packaging. So
agree.
Yeah, let me add one more thing. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
No, I think one of the considerations, you have the different technologies, anaerobic digestion and compost and land application and others. But one of the essential ingredients in all of that is proximity to the plant. It'd be great if you could use a anaerobic digester, but the problem is it's, 8 hours away by drive time. So some of these technologies or these options for recycling are really determined by proximity to the plant. And, if it's much beyond, depending, it's not true across the board, but depending, if it's much beyond, say, 2 or 3 hour hauling time, then the economics of it is not favorable. So that is really an important determination as to where this material is recycled.
Agree.
Good point, Dave. So, so monitoring and analyzing waste data. So getting into that, tracking and analyzing your waste data regularly, identifying trends, patterns, areas for improvement. Always a great tool for, organizations and, waste management improvement opportunities, utilizing some of that data, via it being checks or, bills for your roll off going out each month and a tonnage there. It kind of tells the story of how much you're throwing away or getting rid of. But it also, like I said, it can identify trends and patterns. So, seasonality, trends in certain food production, industries like canning vegetables or freezing vegetables. It's very seasonal. They do 5 months of work or 1 year of work in 5 months of time. So, that time is they're going to have a lot more waste during that time than the other times of the year. And it's kind of working to be the most efficient with, in that period of time. So, be continuously improving, regularly reviewing your current waste generation, disposal practices, redefine the sustainability practices, stay ahead of emerging challenges and opportunities, kind of like I alluded to with the extended producer responsibility. If you can get ahead of that with some data and things, it can only benefit you with your goals and KPIs to become more sustainable. And then last but not least, I think in monitoring and analyzing your data is just embracing technology. It's something that nowadays it's right at the tip of our fingers. We have a ton of information, supercomputers in our hands essentially nowadays. So I think, embracing that technology, utilizing automation where applicable, data analytics and other technologies to improve these efficiencies and reduce environmental impact overall is key. So it's one of those things that we want to utilize. And I know it can be sometimes economically expensive, but in other cases, it might be something that can change your operation for the better overnight. So,
yeah. Kyle, can I add something there?
100%.
I just kind of want to get back to simplicity because you're right. IT spend on data analysis, I think, is important, and I think it'll.
Yep.
From the view of a food manufacturer, I think it will get, and I'm speaking in generalities here, I think it'll get somebody from maybe 60% diversion or 70% diversion to maybe 90% diversion, right?
100%.
But I think, and I'd like your feedback on this, I think simple tracking, simple analytics, I'm talking, a spreadsheet with 7 or 8 columns.
Yep.
I think a lot of that with just some due diligence and consistency, based on what I've seen, oftentimes can get that plant from that 0 to 50%, 0 to 60%. Often we see that's not, I don't want to say it's not hard because there's a lot of aspects to it, right? Operationally, and do we have management buy-in? And, we're going to kind of change our practices a little bit. But I do think that can be done, that low-hanging fruit, you mentioned that earlier, that first 50, 60% of landfill diversion, that can be done easily. I think oftentimes it can be done fairly easily. It's kind of that, okay, now we're here. How do we get that next 20, 30, 40 even? And I think that's where you got to dive in and maybe use some advanced tools. And you can't do all that at once.
No.
You got to, I think you start on the simple side, right?
Exactly. No, you make a good point there. Tackle that low-hanging fruit first, and then really get into this, monitoring and analyzing of your data and those, and don't make it difficult. Keep it simple checks. Like, if it's someone on the floor that literally writes down, weighs a tote, that tote weighs 2,000 pounds. They dump that into a roll-off. Okay, this tote was thrown away on this day at that time, 2,000 pounds, and then every week, like you said, you just kind of gather it and you see, all right, this week we threw away that much and can make decisions on that. So I think simplicity is key with monitoring that data because it can get very crazy fast with all the different numbers.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Yep. I mean, we live in that world and oftentimes I find myself trying to encourage people to scale back the complexity versus the other way around.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
One bite at a time.
That's good. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
All right. Yeah, no, with that, I think I'll just pass it off to Dave to continue with engaging customers and suppliers. So.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. I think one thing about engaging customers, social media, occasionally you can do it on your packaging, which there's not always a lot of room there, but social media, your website and so forth. I've seen numbers where Gen Z and millennials make their buying decisions entirely around sustainability. I'm going to buy this particular product because this company has devoted itself to sustainable practices. A little bit different than the boomers out there, but millennials and Gen Z definitely, and I have kids in the Gen Z range, and it is an important part of their uh, purchase decisions. So I think share what you're doing, that you are devoted to sustainability, and I think that actually has benefits on the sales side. Um, Engaging with local communities and stakeholders about the benefits of supporting the business. I think that that's important. Again, get the word out about what you're doing. I think people in the community appreciate the fact that companies are committed to sustainable practices. And then the last point there, collaborate with suppliers. Um, I think we talked about packaging. We talked about raw materials coming in, letting them know that you're working on this and to better manage the material as it's being delivered. Anything else to add, Todd or Kyle?
The only thing I guess I would add is just, when working with suppliers or customers and things like that, just make sure, their goals align with yours from a sustainability standpoint. If there's a supplier that is focused and aligns with the same sustainable values that you have, maybe consider, using them even if their product is, a couple bucks more expensive and things like that. So I think that can go a little bit further as well from a sustainability standpoint. So leaning on those sustainable supply chains. So
We had at IWR, there was a packaging company that would occasionally reach out to us who did have a sustainability program within their packaging department. And then they would reach out to us then to contact one of the plants that is receiving this packaging to help them depackage and recycle the material. So there's a good example of where a vendor to the food manufacturer is working hand in hand with them to recycle not only the packaging in this case, but then the organics.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's
great
great.
example, Dave.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Rachel, I think that's probably what we have. I know we're over a little bit, but I sure would love to, if there are questions, I'd love to address them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know I've got a couple, so let me just pull up
Okay.
the Q&A. I don't see any questions in here.
Okay.
If anyone does have questions, please go ahead and use the chat or the Q&A feature. Okay, Kim wants to know, are you familiar with Atlantic packaging?
I'm not.
I am not.
Can't say I am, no.
Okay.
No, sounds like I need to be.
Yeah. Maybe do a quick
Okay.
Google search into them.
Absolutely. Yeah, one of my questions is, I want to know, like, do you meet resistance or hesitancy from some of these producers or packagers when you're talking about some of these things that they can implement? And if so, like, what's their main source of hesitation, I guess?
That's a good question. You two want
Yeah,
to
I can take
that?
that by experience. And it could be different everywhere. But I think, the mission for sustainability can be there, but it also has to be economical. There will only be a certain level of costs that these companies can absorb additional costs for what they're doing currently if it's landfilling by going down the sustainability path. So our goal at IWR when we're working on this is to find economical solutions for landfill diversion. And that to me is one of the biggest hurdles that I run across. Now, I will add also to that we have found cost savings when we've come in and worked out a sustainability plan and landfill diversion. So it doesn't have to cost more and it can cost less, particularly because landfills for organics are closing and the price and cost of landfilling is increasing. So.
Yeah. That's a great point. I mean, no business wants to lose money, right? Especially when it's considered waste. Something is waste. Okay, we've got a few more questions rolling in. I am really quick going to put up a slide with contact information for the panelists. So we'll continue to answer these questions, but I want to make sure this is up in case anyone needed to leave the meeting. So Arthur asks, have you looked at any on-site in-vessel solutions to process final food waste rather than hauling to an anaerobic digester?
Yeah, that would be
Question.
probably on-site in-vessel compost versus, there's some on-site anaerobic digestion options. Yeah, I think there are options on-site type options for food producers. I think kind of two things. Oftentimes, these types of technologies become cumbersome to manage and operate by the production group, right? So I come out of food. I have a history of food. I love the industry. Myself and my colleagues for the 20 plus years I was in food, it's fairly constant that we wear 100 hats, and that's in a lot of industries, right? But in food, people do a lot of things. There's a lot of work to be done, and generally kind of the monitoring and running of those types of facilities become a challenge. Not in every case, but in some cases. And then it also becomes, okay, now we've kind of created this, you have to have a certain type of mix. It has to have a certain dwell time. Now, what do we do with the material? So there's just other things to think about. I'm sure those have worked before, but we typically, again, regionally, it varies by region. All of this does. It's the classic, answer. Well, it depends. Generally, we look to work with sites that handle, many tons a day because they're doing it efficiently at a at a competitive cost structure. So I think if a company were to look at on-site digestion, on-site compost, those are I think it's tempting, and I think it's it can be valid. I think it's just the workload of that needs to be considered. And some vendors will say, well, I'll kind of come in and manage it for you. But yeah, that's my personal experience with it. So good question.
Yeah, I've seen a few of the companies I'm working with and have done assessments. They're doing just fine, thank you. They do have their own digester. Particular, I can think of one company that's a cheese company. They manage a lot of their own waste, but it also requires an investment. So it's not only the expertise needed to manage, let's say, an on-site digester, but it's also a capital equipment decision. Do we do that, or do we, buy more equipment to be more productive within our production process, for example? It's an either or. I find a lot of these companies really don't want to manage their waste streams at all, period. And what we do when we come in, if not us, others, but what we do when we come in is we take that off their list of tasks that they have to worry about. Waste is one of those things. If they hear nothing about it throughout the day and they know it's being handled without any problems, that's exactly what they're looking for, because they want to focus more on production, marketing, sales, and other things that are more essential to the operation of the company.
Yep. Good quality food products.
Exactly.
Yep.
Great. Okay, so we are over time. If you guys are willing, though, we've got one more question from Eliza. She wants to know if you can talk a little bit more about how EPR is changing things.
Yeah, I can do that. Or do you guys want to field that one, Kyle?
Yeah, I can start off, Todd, and then if you want to, tap in and, give some thoughts, so just So EPR currently, there's a few states that are kind of leading EPR right now. I would say it's California, Oregon, Maine, Colorado, Minnesota are the big ones. And really what it is it aims to shift the costs and responsibilities for managing the packaging waste of these food products from the local governments and taxpayers, the consumers, to the producers of the packaging. So, it's going to, make them have to track this stuff. They're also going to have to work with recyclers to make things more easier to manage at the end of life for these products. So Todd, I guess, yeah, if you want to kind of dive into it a little more, you can.
Sure. No, and listen, I'm not an EPR expert. I just I think it's 7 states now. Minnesota's fairly new. I think I like the intent. I think it's going to be interesting to see kind of how companies and packaging suppliers, kind of how they start working together on this. I am a little interested. I've seen a couple of presentations where the economic results show that the burden doesn't land on the consumer. I just don't see how that can be true. I think there's going to be costs associated with this. I think it's going to cause food prices to probably increase. Again, I'm not an expert in this field, but when I kind of look at what's being done, I just wonder how that's going to affect food prices. I mean, it is an interesting model. I mean, it kind of takes, and here's one thing I like about it. There's some things I don't like. Here's one thing I like about it. I think so much of sustainability, the doing right and recycling, it's good messages, and it's to the individual. Oftentimes, right? My kids learn about it in school. I get a flyer about it at home. Put it in the right bin, that sort of thing.
Yep.
And that still needs to occur. But I think it's kind of moving some of that responsibility up the chain a little bit, which will probably have more of an effect. I think it will be more effective. I kind of wonder about the cost standpoint, and then, kind of in reality, how it works. Because I can't imagine a company that's selling product in multiple states. You would think that cost would be incurred by those states that have programs like this. But again, that's my opinion, and I'm not an expert on it. It is fascinating. I think it's one of those things that over the next 5 years, we're going to learn a lot. I think there's going to be lessons out of it that, other than doing it, we probably wouldn't be able to learn. We could theorize a lot. I think we'll all be a lot smarter in about 5 years.
Yep.
Yeah, sympathy.
Good question.
Of the food producers, because packaging in food is a lot different than shipping a widget through Amazon and Prime.
Yeah.
In a cardboard, you've got shelf life, you've got safety of food, you've got all these things that currently go into packaging considerations, and then to turn that overnight into a new recycling regime. Really difficult. It's not going to be simple, but I think, Todd, it's going to be a little bit of learning as we go, is my feeling. Unfortunately, I think they've extended that out a little bit, so there's time, but it's going to be tough. I think the infrastructure is not there. We're going to have to learn how to do that on the recycling side. So a lot to be learned yet.
Yeah. I think, you make a good point, Dave, there too. And it's good stuff. So.
Yeah, I think some of this kind of circles back a little bit to Dave when you said, I forget the statistic you said, but a lot of Gen Z and millennials make their purchases based on the sustainability efforts of that company. So I don't know, maybe that's going to play something into how packaging looks in the future. I know, like with my family, when we go grocery shopping, I do my best to buy things that are not in packaging. So I don't buy my apples or potatoes in the bags anymore. I buy them, outside of that. And
Loose.
yes, exactly.
You don't need a banana wrapped in cellophane.
Yeah.
No.
But Dave brings up a great point, and I think it's been brought up by the food industry. It's going to drive innovation, but packaging is there. One of it to catch people's eye, right? It's a sales method. But really, it's oftentimes to keep our food safe and to extend shelf life. And so when we talk about food safety, to have a recyclable, and this is kind of all in the mix. I don't think it's as easy as saying this is 100% the answer and that's 100% what we don't want to do, right? Because there's other considerations. Food safety is a big consideration, and that goes into packaging. So I'm sure this is driving packaging innovation as well. Just how do we get the shelf life to protect the producers economically, and then how do we get the food safety, your hermetic seals, those types of things, while encouraging food safety on that side. So yeah, there's a lot to talk about there.
100%. And I think, even going further down the recycling path with packaging is the infrastructure here to keep up with these, like if we increase recycling, do we have the infrastructure and plants to recycle that packaging, or compost that packaging? Do we have the outlets that can handle this influx and increase in sustainable packaging and, recycling? So lots of stuff.
And as we know, much of that's being sent overseas, which is now challenging, right, in a tariff environment. So a lot of considerations. Yeah, yes. Good question.
Yep.
All right. Well,
very good question.
Yeah, we're at just about an hour now. So I just want to say thank you so much to everyone who joined us. Thank you to you guys for all of your advice and your guidance on this whole process. And if anyone had to leave and then come back to this and miss something, this will be posted on the Brass Tacks Initiative's YouTube page at a later date. So, you won't be missing anything, and feel free to reach out to me or any of these panelists if you have further questions. Thanks everyone for coming. Have a great day.
Yeah. Thanks everybody. Thanks, Rachel. Take care.
Yep. Thanks, Rachel. Bye.
You too. Bye.